The Real Talk has become one of my favorite YouTube channels to find clips of and do reaction videos to, due to the fact that the panelists on this show are so regressive and hilarious. It's just wonderful for me to bring these videos to your homes, to your phones, to however you watch YouTube content on, so we can all enjoy it. And today's video is going to be no different, because the ladies of The Real Talk have recently done a story about a North Carolina man, a white man, who won a discrimination lawsuit and was awarded by a jury $10 million due to the fact that he was fired because he was a white man. And the way that they present this, you can tell from the title, is going to be amazing. They label this a form of reverse discrimination in the title, which is absurd and we will get into later. But before we fatten ourselves up on this clip, we need to talk about weight and how you can better help your weight loss, whatever, transition keto with justice. If you're trying to stick to your fitness New Year's resolutions, you might want to introduce a keto powder in order to speed up your results. A good keto supplement will actually keep you in a prolonged fat burning state known as ketosis for as long as possible, and the keto powder that I recommend right here on this channel is Keto with Justice. This ultra-rich powder helps deliver clean energy, mental focus, and weight management throughout your body. This product uses powerhouse ingredients to support elevated ketone levels and all of the confidence-boosting benefits that come with it. Now, I partnered with the creators of this amazing keto powder in order to get you guys a 51% discount in order to celebrate the new year. Just go to ketowithjustice.com or click the link in the pinned comment or the top of the description and order yours today.
The state of North Carolina has many people scratching their heads as a jury awarded $10 million to a white former health executive for reverse discrimination.
So the clip starts off with our absolute favorite character on The Real Talk due to the fact that she's so absurd. You'll remember this as the person who was just screaming how at the Kyle Rittenhouse case, despite the fact that the Kyle Rittenhouse case was obviously self-defense, and if she had looked into any of the facts or the relevant laws, she would know exactly how Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty, because based on his actions, he was completely justified and totally innocent in that case. But we have to play the clips of her saying how ridiculously so you guys can get a feel for this person. Now, the second thing that you will notice is that she talks about how a lot of people are scratching their heads that this white man in North Carolina was awarded $10 million for a jury based on reverse discrimination. Again, going with the same thing that's in the title, which is ridiculous. As I will explain later, it's just discrimination. Just in the same way when people talk about racism against white people, that's just racism. It's not reverse racism or reverse discrimination. The reverse of racism is not being racist. The reverse of discrimination is not discriminating. But let's see her break down this story and why she's so head scratching that this white man was awarded money for problems in the gays or whatever.
According to Fox 46 Charlotte, Duvall, a white man, was the senior vice president for marketing and communications at Novant for 5 years when he was fired and replaced by two women, one a racial minority. During a diversity and inclusion initiative in 2018 that included explicit goals to remake the demographics of Novant's senior leadership, according to his attorney.
So let's break down what she just told us right there, because she keeps saying it was his attorney or he alleges or whatever, which is weird because this case is settled. The jury has reviewed it and they ruled in his favor. So it's not alleged, it's not his attorney says this, the other side says that. It's he made claims in a court of law and those claims were proven, and they were proven to such an extent that he was awarded $10 million for the discrimination that occurred against him when he was fired as a part of a diversity and inclusion initiative.
A jury in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Charlotte, North Carolina Division decided that Duvall, stating in court records that Duvall proved that his race, Caucasian, and or his sex, male, was a motivating factor in Novant's health decision to terminate him. So he's saying he lost his job because he was a white man.
And because he was fired and replaced during the course of this diversity initiative, he was not only able to prove that because his replacements were a white woman and a black woman, that he was discriminated based on his race, but he was also able to prove that he was discriminated based on the fact that he was male. Now, if these people had any consistency at all whatsoever, they would talk about how his two identities of being white and a male intersected in order to make him vulnerable to this discrimination. Because again, this was all about making it less white and less male. And one of the reasons why, based on the way that this company ended up implementing this initiative, that he was not fired due to the fact that he was suddenly unqualified for the position, was that it actually took two different people to replace him in this position. So they literally filled his position with two less qualified individuals that, by their very nature of two people filling the job of one, are less qualified individuals. But let's get into their discussion because it's about to take a left turn and we gotta talk about it.
Ladies, please weigh in on this. Does diversity include white people, first thing? And how seriously do you think companies take complaints of discrimination?
So here we have a case of clearly defined discrimination. It was won out in court, yet the framing of this segment is, does diversity include white people? Should white people even be included in what we're talking about? And by the definition of the word diversity, which just means different people, it should include white people, obviously, but in their definition, they're going with the Akilah Hughes definition, diversity is just a code word for anti-white or less white people. And if you don't believe me, let's roll into the first person to answer this question.
I mean, let's be clear. He just got $10 million, right? I feel like there's some checks waiting to come our way because how many times we did not get the job? How many times we weren't the ones chosen?
Yes.
Is there a check coming? Because we should have one.
So, of course, immediately this person decides to make it all about her. She decides to talk about how, oh, what about all the times that we didn't get the job? What about all the times that we weren't chosen? Where's our checks? As she sits on a panel that is literally designed to be a non-white person version of The View. She is on the third knockoff of The View right now that is meant to appeal to a more urban audience, which is why all the participants on this show are minorities, and the show is named The Real Talk. That's what she's on right now. She's literally a diversity hire, complaining about how she didn't get a check for the times that she wasn't hired. Okay, well, it's not a strong start. Let's go a little bit forward.
I think what's interesting is that the fact that it's a woman, the fact that it was a black woman as well, is really interesting. But I don't know if diversity includes white people because the whole diverseness is normally for urban, Asian, Hispanic. I don't know if it includes it. Like,
Well,
I
let me
really had a
tell
hard
you.
time trying to figure that out.
So if you're scoring at home, kids, we already have one vote in the column for diversity just being a code word for anti-white. And according to this woman, and I have to highlight and mention the categories of races that are included in diversity, diversity includes the races of Asian, Hispanic, and urban. You know, the urban race. I guess you can't have urban/rural diversity. I mean, I would think that would make sense because if you have the job positioned in an urban area or a rural area, you're either going to get urban or rural people. But maybe there is an urban race. If you guys know what the urban race is, let me know down in the comments below. Also, do you think we're going to get totally blanked on this? Do you think that we're going to get all of the panelists to say that diversity is anti-white and this guy shouldn't have won the lawsuit? Or do you think that we're going to get some mixture? Maybe we'll get one holdout. Let me know again in the comments.
Well,
Marcel.
diversity means, go ahead.
I actually wrote, I was like, Lonnie's either going to tell us, or I have the textbook dictionary
Go ahead.
meaning. So the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. So it's different. That is the point.
Okay, so this woman right here brought the dictionary definition of diversity, and she emphasizes how in this dictionary definition, diversity just means different. It just means different people all in an area different socioeconomically, different in terms of sexual orientation, different in terms of race or ethnic origin. So whether or not this includes white people should be pretty much settled right here, because all we're talking about is different, diverse, a diverse group of people, which would include white people because they would be included in that diversity. Let's hear her bring it home and tell all these other women how diversity does include white people and they're all being anti-white racist. I'm sure that's the way she's going to go with this. It's not like I've seen this video before.
So I don't see white as being included
That's
in
what I'm
diversity.
saying.
So I don't see white as being included
That's
in
what I'm
diversity.
saying.
It's different. It's different. It just means different. And I don't consider white people included in diversity. These are the kind of people that look at a Tyler Perry movie, which is virtually an all-black cast of characters in a movie, and they would call that diverse, even though it's literally the opposite because everybody is of the same racial origin, and they're cast specifically to be of the same racial origin. It's absolutely ridiculous in every way, but it is hilarious to watch this woman literally read out a definition of a word that contradicts what she's saying, only to contradict the definition. She brought it on a cue card so she could know how to give you the definition properly and still ended up butchering it. That's how ridiculous the people are on this show. But let's throw it over to Lonnie, the bigger woman on the left side, to see if she can bring it home and make this a 4 for 4.
No, because if it's different, it depends on what the majority is. So
Right.
if
There's
it's
that.
higher and the majority,
So this is where things get a little bit interesting, and we talked about this on this channel before, and I talked about this woman specifically, about how I think she might be the best person on this panel of people. Now, obviously, she wasn't very good in the Rittenhouse case. Everybody on this panel was absolutely terrible in that case. But I get a sense, maybe because I've seen this video before and I'm just kind of giving you little hints like I haven't, that she's going to go in a different direction from these people. And you could tell by the way she framed it about how it depends on what the majority is, which would lead me to believe that this is somebody who looks at something like an all-black cast or an all-Asian cast for a show or a movie or for a workplace and does not consider that to be diverse. But let's let her go in and we'll see if she proves me right about being the best among the people in this panel.
there's two problems here. One is not reverse discrimination. It's just discrimination. Okay, you get discriminated.
Right.
So credit where credit is due, because she's 100% right in this scenario. The idea that you would call this reverse discrimination is absolutely ridiculous. If you get discriminated against, you are being discriminated against. Reverse discrimination, as I said earlier in the video, is not discriminating against a person. On top of that, lefties don't even typically do that whole power plus privilege equals discrimination that they do for racism. So all these other people are just far more regressive in that they believe, or at least they came into this segment under the belief, that discriminating against white people is okay because white people bad and they're not included in diversity. So again, credit where credit is due to Lonnie for just dropping the knowledge right away after all these other people went off and said the dumb things that they said.
Number one, they hired 2 women to replace 1 man. I got a problem with that. Number 2,
Because one woman could have done the job.
exactly.
It doesn't take 2
no,
women
That tells you
to
about
do-
inequality. That we ain't gonna even get on
Right.
that, okay?
Well, theoretically, one woman could have done the job of this person, but the people that they hired to replace this person were obviously not fully qualified for those positions. So the idea that one woman could do the job, yes, queen, feminism, yeah, get the patriarchy, is nonsensical. If they wanted to put in some effort, they probably could have found a woman capable of doing the job, but obviously they went for less qualified people, which better buttressed this guy's case of discrimination in a court of law, because if they actually had a more qualified person, they would have hired a more qualified person. Hiring 2 people to fill one position by its very nature would indicate that you're hiring less qualified people.
But also, this is diversity through firing instead of diversity through hiring. That is the main problem.
Yeah.
So, of course, this man has a right because he was actually over the marketing. If you look at his pedigree was great.
Yeah.
You know, they could not give in the court files, they could not give an excuse of why.
They fired
just said,
him.
"Oh, we're gonna let it be known." So you're gonna have cases like this
Come up.
if you don't hire diverse. You
In
can't
the first
fire
place.
diverse in
You
the first
can't
place.
fire-
You know, I've been in this position before when I've been on panels with a bunch of other people that clearly did not do any reading or research, so it is refreshing and it should be acknowledged that Lonnie actually is bringing facts to the table. During the course of this civil case, one of the reasons why this guy won his civil case, he showed his qualifications, his pedigree, his experience, and compared and contrasted it to the two people that they hired in order to replace them. And there was no excuse that the company could bring to the table that was compelling in any way for why they replaced him based on his qualifications with these two women. He was so far beyond them that it didn't make any other sense, so therefore it could have only been discrimination because this was done during the course of a diversity and inclusion hiring session. And by the way, Lonnie is also right on point in saying that there's a big difference between trying to achieve diversity through firing people who have earned their position, who have secured their position, and hiring people with diversity in mind. Now, a lot of people will say that's discrimination in both ways, but the impact of taking something away from somebody is completely different than offering something to begin with to a more diverse group of people for whatever goals that you're trying to achieve. This company fired somebody, which left a bad taste in his mouth, and obviously he ended up filing suit. And obviously, when you're firing somebody for somebody else, you have to compare the qualifications in a way that you don't necessarily need to, because you can say during an interview or whatever, that's why you hired this person over another person. So Lonnie is on point, actually doing the research, actually reading what was involved in this case before forming her opinion, unlike these three other people who just said white people shouldn't get money and it's okay to discriminate against them because diversity means anti-white.
Hire someone
Right.
in order to bring in diversity is what you're saying. You're saying
Exactly.
add to the situation, don't take away from
Exactly.
the situation.
When we had affirmative action, this is when we were actually diversifying our corporations.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to figure out ways to do it. And so they're going to have these issues of people getting sued and getting a lot of money because you can't do that.
Right.
Any court of law is going to look at them and go,
Yeah.
no, you cannot do that.
Again, she's 100% on point. If we have laws preventing discrimination based on race, then you can't go around firing people based on their race or ethnic origin. It's absolutely ridiculous. If this happened to a minority, 100% of the people on this panel would be in agreement that this was improper to do. But because it's to a white person and a dreaded white male, probably straight, oh my God, how horrible, you have an argument amongst the people on this panel between the uninformed three and the one person who actually did their research into this case and understands the problems that come into effect when you start firing people based on their race or ethnic origin.
I think a
can't
lot of
fire
people
me.
are
Yeah,
I
about
agree.
this specifically because how many times have we seen
That's
Latinos,
what I'm
Asians,
saying.
Black people that are minorities complaining about, you know, the exact same thing? I ain't seen none of them get $10 million.
Right.
So this is a classic whataboutism that we see all the time whenever we're discussing stories about discrimination against white people. We bring up an abstract, non-existent minority that was discriminated against allegedly in the exact same way that didn't get the same results as this white person. Therefore, you can somehow make this story of discrimination, racial hatred against white people about discrimination against minorities and about white people being bad, evil, and racist. However, Lonnie's got us covered, so I'm gonna let her take this away.
Right.
Well, it was a case. It wasn't about hiring, but it was a black employee from Tesla got the $137 million for
geez.
racial discrimination. So
That is good to know.
it's
That is good to
happening.
know.
That is good to know.
hap-
Lonnie is just doing my job for me, and I absolutely love it. So here you have this woman throwing out an unqualified, uninformed, ridiculous opinion about how minorities never get any money in discrimination lawsuits, even though anybody who's worked in HR ever knows for a fact that these laws are set up for disabled people, for minorities, for women to sue based on those type of discriminations. It's actually very rare that white people sue over discrimination, and even rarer that they end up winning discrimination lawsuits. And the fact that the case that she brought up was $137 million paid to this black person over at Tesla for alleged discrimination, well, actually, they determined it to be discrimination, just goes to show that this woman has no perspective on what's actually going down. This person literally got almost 14 times as much money for discrimination against Tesla as this white person in North Carolina, but there's no perspective, there's no acknowledgement of that, and even after she's just shut down, totally torched on the stage by Lonnie, look at her response and how ridiculous she is.
And it's gonna keep happening.
Because I think it's important for people to hear that, because I didn't know that, and I think a lot of the times, especially as minorities, we're afraid to speak up because we're afraid that if we say, I felt that, somebody was discriminating against me because of my whatever it is, and we don't speak up because we need our job.
She's like, wow, I didn't know that. Thanks for informing me. That's good to know. It's really shocking to me, who didn't bother to do any research before this segment, that minorities can actually sue for discrimination laws that were written to help minorities sue based on discrimination. That's absolutely shocking. And then she goes on to this whole diatribe about how minorities need their jobs and they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to claim discrimination. Again, discrimination claims happen all the time. And in the United States of America, people file lawsuits over absolutely everything. I used to do graduate courses, and some of them were on public administration, which had HR elements to it. And we would talk about, and we would design, and we would interview experts related to this, how there are sex discrimination and racial discrimination lawsuits filed all the time, and it is a common misconception that all the companies and institutions have already been sued and this has already been adjudicated. One of the reasons why people hire Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo or any of these other race hustlers like Al Sharpton to come do talks and works and all that is that grift that they're selling can help shield you from future racial discrimination lawsuits, because that's considered a step towards diversity and inclusion. So not only are there a ton of racial discrimination lawsuits across the country, but there's this whole parasitic racial hustling industry that has infiltrated corporate America, and that's why you see things in Coca-Cola about being less white and all these other stories that you see, because that by law can actually help protect you from future lawsuits. That's how crazy our system is when it comes to discrimination based on sex or based on race.
Right. Now, let me ask you guys in response to this, because this is an actual fact out there too. More than half of whites, 55%, say that they, generally speaking, feel that there is a discrimination against white people in America today.
I like how she says, what do you think about this? 55% of white people say that there is actually discrimination of white people in the United States of America. How do we respond to that? After this woman and 3 of the 4 people on this panel spent the whole segment talking about how white people shouldn't be able to sue for racial discrimination, meaning it should be okay to fire white people based on their race in order to get diversity goals. How do we respond to that? How do we figure out what's wrong with these white people? And they throw it over to Lonnie, and honestly, this is where her and I separate. This is where her and I need to divorce. We need to split up, because she talks about policies that could be implemented, and this is where you get into racial equity and representation at companies, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'll explain it to you on the other side.
Which is why you have to have policies.
Yes.
And the policies, I think the best way that we were actually attacking diversity is by looking at the population, looking at seeing how many do you have here, what's the percentage of that. So then you look at a company and say, do you even have this type of percentage? So that would help.
So I 100% disagree with this, because all this is going to lead to is a bunch of other frivolous lawsuits and people being actively discriminated against. And a perfect example of this is look at the Asian population and look at how they perform in a bunch of different high-end professions. If you were just going to look at the general population in the United States of America and say that, let's say for doctors, you need to have this percentage of Asians working as doctors in your hospital, because they're a small minority, they would be underrepresented based on the population of qualified people within that community. The reality is, people come from vastly different cultures and different origin nations, and those different cultures prioritize different things like education levels, career paths, etc. And even if we were to take race out of it for a second and just talk about immigration status, we can see the difference in mentality between that immigrant mentality or the first generation American mentality and the mentality of a native born American. We know for a fact that immigrants are far more likely to start their own business rather than work for somebody else. We know for a fact that immigrants to this country, especially if they come from India or Asia, get better educated due to the fact that our immigration system only takes a certain amount of people in terms of raw numbers from these nations, so only the highest achieving people are able to make their way over to the United States. So we wouldn't expect the same amount of Indian janitors as we would expect white janitors in the United States of America, because Indians are far more likely to be higher educated or more start your own business minded than the average American person. It's just a fact. So looking at this, which by the way is what is done by the federal government, especially when Democrats are in power, and trying to retroactively buy the numbers based on a lack of representation, this equity standard would lead to negative consequences and the exact type of discrimination through firing rather than hiring that Lonnie just said that she was opposed to. So no, this is not a solution. This is already implemented, and it's already creating the problems, such as the problem that this video is talking about.
That's what
That would help
affirmative
from the
action was
get-go.
about. Exactly.
Start off with having
When you're
a diversified
building
company.
your company and you're
Right.
building your corporate, you know, how important it is to look at that and that you're hiring that way versus reacting later and being
and then
like,
firing and bringing it.
Yeah. Now
exactly.
you got people up here mad and upset and everything. It's just too
Yeah,
much. They'll
it is
figure it
too
out.
much.
So while I do find the lack of knowledge about businesses and corporations to be absolutely hilarious, the way that they're just saying focus on diversity first when you're starting your business, even though people typically start the business with a small amount of people, you don't just start and you're Amazon in 2021, you start as Amazon did back in the 1990s, a much smaller company with a paper sign and nowhere near the level of sophistication you ultimately end up with. So obviously that is hilarious, but what is also hilarious and should be noted is that Lonnie has basically swayed everybody on the panel to be against diversity through firing, which coming into this, they were totally against the person who ended up suing and winning after he proved discrimination against him based on the fact that he was a white male. This is the power that having somebody who is informed even a little bit on the subject that you're talking about has on a panel where everybody didn't bother to do any research at all whatsoever. So credit where credit is due to Lonnie, even though we have our disagreements, she's at least trying to be knowledgeable about this case before she just goes off on an emotional rant about how minorities never get nothing for nothing, blah, blah, blah. What even is discrimination lawsuits except a vehicle for white people, which is just an insane thing to say. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, you show them by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social media. Support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about the real talk once again. Till next time.